Hey guys, Dave here. Welcome to Computer Hobbyist. Today I want to talk about software engineer interviews. They're a little bit different than other jobs you've probably interviewed for. This video is essentially made for people who are trying to get their first software engineer job, or maybe they've only had one software engineer job and they're looking for another. If you're a senior software engineer, you've worked at plenty of places and stuff, you've been to plenty of interviews, you're probably not going to get much out of this. But if you're new to software engineering, I think you will. You'll probably get quite a bit out of it. But I've been to a lot of software engineering interviews for the last, 13 years. I've been a senior software engineer. I've seen all sorts of stuff in software engineer interviews. Most of them are pretty similar, but there's some that were completely over the top. But let's start about what you can expect when you go through the interviewing process. First thing is you're going to be contacted by either a recruiter or a human resources rep. If they found you on like LinkedIn, that's just a recruiter. He'll give you a call and he'll ask you what your skills are, and he's got a set of skills for whatever job he's trying to sell you, and he's just verifying you have those skills, and then he's going to ask you how much you want to make and all that type of stuff. Don't be low on how much you want to make. Tell them what you want to make. Don't say, oh, well, if I make it 10,000 less, maybe I'll be more likely to get the job. Don't do that, because a lot of the raises in this field are very low. And it may take you 6 years to make up for that $10,000 that you skimped yourself out of. So tell them what you want to make, and don't be ashamed to do so. All right. As far as if the human resources from a company calls you, that's usually if they found you directly. The human resources person's just going to ask you a few questions about your skills and then ask you things about gaps in your resume and so on and so forth. Like if you had like a 4-month period between two of your jobs, they're going to ask about it, and they're going to ask why you left previous jobs and so on and so forth. So, all right, next thing. You're going to speak to a lead engineer on the phone, or a senior software engineer, something on the phone, someone, and they're just going to see if you're suitable for an interview. So they're going to ask you some technical questions, but they're going to be really light, just to verify you have some knowledge in the area they're looking for, and also to verify that you don't seem like a weird person or something, or or a bad person. You'd be surprised what people see here in some of these interviews. But yeah, just act normal and answer the questions, and you should be fine. If you don't know the technology well, they're not going to call you in for another interview. But don't worry about it. Just be honest, and don't say anything weird or anything. All right, and then you have the in-person interview by multiple people, but there's a caveat to this. They may give you a coding test first. And some of these coding tests are fair. I mean, they ask questions that are reasonable, things you would actually do on the job. And then you have some of these high-end companies, I call them. I think they call them FANG companies. They ask you all this garbage on these coding interviews. It's stuff you're never going to actually do in the real job. It's just something meant to weed people out. So that's something to watch out for. Amazon is notorious for that, and Google is notorious for asking coding questions that about things you're never going to actually have to do at the job. So that's also a red flag. I mean, if they're being extreme in the coding questions, it means they're just trying to eliminate enormous amounts of people and stuff. So yeah, like I said, that's a red flag. All right, as far as the in-person interview, those suck. They may call you in and have four different people interview you. And one guy will come in, interview you for an hour, next guy for like a half hour or something, next guy for a half hour, and then they'll have someone else come in. And a lot of the questions the different people will ask you will be the same as what another asked, and some of the questions will be really unfair and stuff too. And you'll also get asked a question occasionally, and you'll answer it correctly, and the interviewer will say, no, that's not correct. And you think to yourself, you're like, man, I'm 100% sure that was correct. And then you go home and you look it up online or in your books or whatever, and sure enough, you were correct and the interviewer was wrong. I mean, that's happened on occasions too. Let's see here. Now let's go over words, phrases, and activities that should concern you. The first one is, we want you to hit the ground running. This is a red flag. What this means is they don't want to offer you any training whatsoever. What they want to do is you sit down at your desk there, they give you a password, and you start writing code. If you don't 100% meet the qualifications of what they need, they won't hire you. I mean, it'll be to the point where it's ridiculous. Like if you've never used Jira before, which is a project management software, which takes about 15 minutes for an engineer to learn how to use good enough to do his job, they won't hire you. They're not willing to put in the 15 minutes of training. So that's something to look out for. Another one is, this is a good one. Remember this one. We work hard and we play hard. Dude, what they're telling you is you're going to be working 80 hours a week, and then on Friday night everyone goes to the bar and gets completely drunk, and instead of visiting their family on the one night they have off, they go to the bar and end up getting a divorce because of it. So that's what that means. You're going to be working massive hours there, so that's a big time red flag. All right, another one. We're always hiring, or we're always hiring like crazy. Yeah, it's because your average senior software engineer lasts about 3 weeks, and your average regular software engineer lasts about 3 months because you treat them poorly, you make them work an enormous amount of hours. They may give you good pay and good benefits and stuff, but you're not going to be there longer than 3 months. All right, here's another one. The interviewer pontificates about how you shouldn't ask other engineers many questions when working with them. They do this to a lot of newbie software engineers, newbie programmers or whatever. They say, oh, don't ask any questions, just figure it out on your own. Well, there's truth to that and there's stupidity in that, but the truth is, yeah, you should always do your own research and try to figure stuff out on your own. But if you've been working on a problem for 2 days, put in 16 hours of work, and you're not getting any headway, and the guy who sits in the cube next to you, you think he knows the answer, you get up and you ask him, instead of wasting your company's time, because otherwise it's going to take you 3 to 4 weeks to figure this out on your own, and that's a complete waste of everyone's time. And you're also harming the people you didn't ask, because now they have to do more work because you were stuck on a problem for a month because you wouldn't ask someone who knew. And then here's the worst one. This is the worst kind of company you want to work for. If they tell you they have 360-degree feedback, boy, you better think twice about working there. You're probably like, well, what is 360-degree feedback? That means that everyone who works with you, whether they're in your department, no matter how low level of a job they are, or any departments you work with, will write your review at the end of the year. And you're probably saying, well, that doesn't sound that bad. Well, here's the deal. If you want to be successful, you're going to have to step on people's toes on occasion to get your job done and get a job done correctly. That's just the way it is. With 360-degree feedback, you're just going to be destroyed on your review by these people whose toes you had to step on in order to get your job done. Or maybe someone wasn't doing their job and you called them out on it or something, and they're going to be mad at you and say something unfair on your review. And it gets worse than this. This is actually very insidious. What I mean by that is, what makes this worse is when they have these people write your review, they force them to say something bad about you. They'll say like the good qualities, and the next column they'll say you have to list some bad qualities. And if the person says, oh, well, this person doesn't really have any bad qualities, they're going to give them the review back and say, no, rewrite it. Everyone has a bad quality. So what this does is they always have a reason either to not give you a raise or fire you. So if you're working there and they only offer you a 1% raise, and you're like, well, what gives here? Why am I only getting a 1% raise when I think I'm doing a great job? And they'll say, oh, well, 20 people reviewed you and all of them had something bad to say about you. Yeah, because they forced them to say something bad about you. Let's see, anything else I can think of about this? Oh, and firing. Now that everyone around you has reviewed you and everyone has been forced to write something bad about you, even if they don't know anything bad about you, they always have a reason to fire you. So if you're part of like a protected class and you get like some racist or something who's your boss and he doesn't like you and he fires you, and you think it's because you're part of a protective class or something, well, he's got protection in court now because they can bring your job reviews to court and say 20 people wrote this guy's review and every single one of them had something bad to say about him, so they always got an excuse to fire you. I won't work. I worked once at a place with 360-degree feedback. Never again. Never. The only way I would do it is like if I was desperate for a job and I couldn't find one and I was about to go bankrupt or something. That's the only way I would work for a place with 360-degree feedback. All right, what else do we have here? Behavioral questions, and some of these are questions to trick you. First one, why should we hire you? You should know the answer to this before you get to the interview because everyone's going to ask you this. Not everyone, probably 90% of the places you go to. So before the interview, write down a coherent reasons why they should hire you and memorize it and just rattle it off when they ask. All right. What is your biggest weakness? This is often asked in interviews. You have to tell them something. If you say, oh, I don't have any weaknesses, you've just identified yourself as a liar and they can't trust anything else you say in the interview. So you got to say something that they're probably not concerned with. I usually say, well, I'm a little impatient at times. That's what I tell them. I've heard from other people who have said like they're a little bit shy, but when they get to know people, you know, they're more able to talk to them. You can say that if you're applying for a software engineer job, but if you're applying for a project manager job and you say you're shy, you just blew the interview. They're not going to hire you. All right. Tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker or boss and how you resolved it. Don't say I've never had a conflict with a coworker or boss because they're not going to know you're a liar. Everyone has. Think of something that's really benign and tell them about it. And there should always be when you tell them how you resolved it, it should always be a successful resolution. Like something like, I don't know, what would be a good thing here? Well, a coworker of mine was late on his part of the project. So I had talked to him about it, and he said, no, it was actually due later when it wasn't. So the way I resolved it is I grabbed the email which said when the project was done and showed it to him, and then he was like, oh, okay, and he apologized. That's a reasonable answer. Don't say something like, I got in some big argument with some guy and we went out back and boxed it out or something. Don't say something stupid like that. Let's see here. Here's a great question. They should ask this at every interview. This isn't a trick question either. If you have to learn a new skill or technology, how would you go about doing so? Well, most people are going to say, oh, well, I'll just Google it. Well, that's a fair answer, but it's not a great answer. The great answer is, I'll do a little Googling, but mostly I'm going to go out and buy a book about the technology, read it, work through the examples, and learn it on my own. That's a much better answer than saying you're just going to Google everything. How do you manage multiple projects you are working on? Yeah, no matter where you work, you're probably going to have several projects to work on at once. Just tell them how you do it. And here's a trick question. Did your last company have coding standards? You have to be honest with this. If you did, say yes. If you did not have coding standards, say no, we didn't, but I'm open to it. That's a reasonable answer. What you do not want to say, you never want to say this, is say, oh, well, coding standards stifle innovation, so we don't have it. Well, you just blew the job interview. They're not hiring you. Some of the coding questions they're going to ask you, I'm just going to assume they're C# questions here. The first is a trick question. You're going to be asked this at quite a few places. How do you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 with C#? Dude, if you answer 10, you're an idiot, because no one knows is a 10 in C#, except for maybe the people at Microsoft who work on the team that writes the language or something, but really, from what I've seen in the real world, maybe a 9 is about the highest someone could actually get. So I'm going to answer this. I qualify it before I answer. I say no one's really a 10. I said really a 9 is about the highest you can get. And I say the reason being is because they're always coming out with new features for the language and so on and so forth. And there's always something that you don't know. So I'll usually say I'm like a 9. If you're only a 6 in it, well, they'll tell them a 6 because oftentimes they're using this question to determine what questions they should follow up with. So if you say I'm a 10, and then he's going to say, oh, well, this guy, if he actually believes you, he's going to be like, oh, well, this guy knows everything. He's going to ask you really hard questions, and you're going to get every single one of them wrong, and you're not getting that job. So be honest about it, and never say you're a 10, and always qualify it before you answer why you're not rating yourself as a 10, because no one's really a 10 in this language or any other. All right. What's the difference between an interface and an abstract class? You should know this. If you don't know it, study up on it, because you're going to be asked this at multiple interviews. All right, what's a CLR and what does it stand for? Common Language Runtime, and then just describe what it does. All right, what is a delegate used for? That's a really common question. What's a sealed class? That's really common too. What's the difference between a string and string builder? I can't tell you how many times I've been asked this in an interview. So if you're not familiar with string builder, research it, learn about it, and memorize the differences between that and a regular string. What are the 4 pillars of object-oriented programming? I've been in this field so long, I remember when it was the 3 pillars of object-oriented programming, but now it's 4. But yeah, if you don't know it, go online, look it up, learn it. It'll take about 5 minutes to learn it and memorize it, because you're going to be asked this. All right, what's the difference between private, public, protected, and internal? This you should know. If you don't know, research it. Have you ever used LINQ, and if so, tell me what it is? Well, be honest on this one. Some people, a lot of places use LINQ, but some don't. So if you've never used it, just say, hey, I've never used it, but I'm open to learning it. All right, and what are lambda expressions? You should know that. What else do we have here? What do you do if you don't know the answer to a question? The worst thing you can say is, I don't know. What I do is I say, I'm not sure, or if it's something that I forgot, I say, oh, God, I forgot. I'm like, that's something I just have to Google. That's a reasonable answer, because you're telling them how you would get the information. If you came across this in a real job, you'd Google it, or tell them you can look through one of your books or something. That's pretty reasonable. It's not as good as knowing the answer, but it's a lot better than saying, I don't know, or, So, all right, horror stories about interviews. The worst place I ever interviewed at was Avanade in Chicago, Illinois. I get to the interview, and the interviewer sits me down. I don't know, he went to some Ivy League school. I can't remember which one it is. He gives me a 20-minute pontification about his qualifications and this wonderful school he went to and stuff. And I was applying for an entry-level C#.net job. I had just finished the .NET developers program. This is many years ago. I don't know, this was like 15 years ago or something. So anyhow, he starts asking me all these questions about C#, and I didn't think I was going to know any of them after the way he started the interview, because he made it seem like it was such an elitist organization. But out of the 30 questions he asked me, I knew 28 of them. I knew the right answer. There was only 2 I didn't know the correct answer to, and one was about COM. And really, in .NET, you don't need to use COM. And the other one was about interfaces, I think it was. And I got the answer wrong. That's why I told you on this to know the difference between abstract classes and interfaces. But those are only 2 I got wrong. So I figured, I was like, I'm probably going to get this job, because I knew 28 out of 30. So then he goes into this 30-minute speech about how Avanade only hires the best employees, blah, 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 and goes on and on and on and on. Mind you, this was an entry-level job I was applying for. So he's going on and on and on. And finally he says to me, he's like, you're one of the best people we interviewed, but you are not the best. He's like, so I can't use you. So that kind of pissed me off. So I looked at him, I said, you guys only hire the best? He said, yeah. And I said, well, how did you get this job? And this guy's face just dropped. And he didn't know what to say. So I just got up and left. I was like, someone acting that inappropriately in the interview. He just told me I didn't get the job. So I was like, what do I care? But yeah. All right, another bad interview. The douchebag who gave me a 45-second interview. Some recruiter calls me up about a job. He asked me the usual questions about my qualifications, whether I know these technologies and stuff. I said, yeah, I know these. This was when I had first learned .NET, and I was looking for my first .NET job. I was like, I know C sharp. I'm like, however, I haven't had a job doing it yet. So I'm looking for like entry level. And I'm like, so tell this guy who's looking for someone that this guy's an entry level job. So the recruiter's like, yeah, sure. So he gets me an interview, and I go to the interview. So this guy, he picks up my resume and starts reading it. And he looks at me and he's like, you're looking for an entry-level job? I said, yes, I'm looking for an entry-level job. I'm like, I told the recruiter to tell you that. He's like, well, I hadn't looked at your resume. He's like, I'm not looking for an entry-level person. So that lasted like 45 seconds. So I had another job at the time that, and I had to take a PTO day off work to go to this interview for 45 seconds. So that left a really bad feeling in my mouth. Then there was the interviewer who made me spell out each line of code when describing what was needed to write something. Essentially, this was a telephone interview with 3 people. And I can't remember what he asked me, but it was something which required about 25 lines of code. And so I was like, well, can I just type it in Notepad here or something and just show it to you? He's like, oh, no, just say it. So, trying to dictate code orally isn't easy. When I write code, I write something, I test it. If it doesn't work, well, then I debug it and write something new. But just spitting it out like that, I'm not good at, so I didn't get that job. All right, and here's a really bad one. This was at the University of Illinois at Chicago. This was before I was a C# programmer and I was doing Java. They called me in for some Java job, and I get there, and they had the biggest table I had ever seen in my life. There must have been at least 20 people sitting at this table. So I sat down and I don't know, I felt like all eyes were on me, and I felt kind of, well, I didn't feel kind of uncomfortable. I did feel uncomfortable. And so all 20 people at this desk, one after another, are just shouting questions at me, and some of these people who were asking the questions had no clue what kind of questions you should ask in an interview and stuff. It was just ridiculous. So I was just like interrogated for like an hour nonstop by these people, and I didn't get the job. And you know what? I'm glad I didn't, because that left a really sour taste in my mouth. All right, now what makes a good software engineer? This is just my opinion. You can get plenty of people who disagree with it. The first is the ability, this is the most important thing, the ability to learn new technologies on your own and become an authority on them. No matter what you know now, you're going to have to learn something new at whatever job you get. Maybe not the first year, but maybe the second. But you're going to have to continually learn new technologies in this field. So you have to be able to know how to learn them on your own. Usually I do it by reading books mostly. If you're one of these people who just does it by using Google, well, you're not going to ever be very proficient in that technology. All right, the ability to get your work done on time. There are so many people out there who, if you ask them any questions about programming, they can just dictate the answers. They're very scholastic, they're very good at memorizing things, but then when you ask them, they actually write something. I mean, something that would take like a regular software engineer, like, I don't know, 4 hours to do this, ends up taking them 6 weeks and stuff. There's a lot of people like that in the field. But when they go to interviews, they do real good because they're good at memorizing information. All right. And they can get here's another good one. This is what the really good software engineers can do. They can get their work done without supervision or without intervention by management. I worked at one place as a senior software engineer, and we had a 3-month period with no manager at all because the manager quit, and we just managed our own projects, got everything done for the other departments on time, and everyone was happy. That's the sign of good software engineers. All right, and number 4, I mentioned this before, the willingness to ask somebody who knows instead of wasting the next 60 hours trying to figure out how to do something that your coworker sitting in the cube next to you knows how to do. I know I mentioned that before, but it's worth mentioning again. Always thinking of new ideas that will help the project you are working on or your department as a whole. There's always ways to improve what you guys are doing, so think about it, and when you come up with suggestions, let your boss know, because that's what they hired you for, is to come up with good ideas. A software engineer is generally, most people when they're hired to work. Well, you're hired to work somewhat with a software engineer, but the most important thing you're hired to do is to think. And so if you can think and come up with new ideas, you're going to be a hell of a lot better software engineer than someone who just writes code all day and never comes up with any good solutions or new solutions to problems. Another thing is to be able to determine what features should be implemented based largely on whether they'll give a positive return of investment. This is very important because whenever you're doing the gathering requirements for a project, people are going to come up with a lot of different features they want. And some of these features will never be used and they may take a long time to code and stuff. Or some of these features may only save the company like $1,000 a year or something in labor costs, and if it costs you $50,000 to implement this feature and it's only going to save $1,000 a year, you're never going to see a return on investment. So you need to be able to open your mouth and say, hey, I don't see anyone ever using this feature, you know what I mean? Or say, there's no way we're going to be able to get a return of investment on this. This doesn't mean they're going to listen to you. They may tell you to implement it anyways, but they need to know in advance that there's never going to be a return on investment, or that you don't believe anyone's ever going to use this feature. So that's pretty much all I got. Oh, one other thing. Understanding that it is a waste of time to memorize anything you can look up. A man who was much smarter than me named Albert Einstein, one of his most famous sayings was, never memorize anything you can look up. I don't know what is with people with this memorization nonsense, but it's like they went to college and they had to memorize information or something, so they sit there for hours several times a week trying to memorize information. Complete waste of time. Just know where to look it up. I don't remember every line of code I've written in C#, and occasionally you'll forget how you did something. But if you remember what project you looked on, you can just go back and look at that project and see how you did it. So, but that's all I got. Like I said, this is mostly just for entry-level software engineers, but I hope it gives you some ideas and helps you get a job. Thanks for watching and have a good evening.